California files two new lawsuits against Uber and Lyft that allege the companies have engaged in so-called wage theft. Fox 5 legal analyst Wendy Patrick joining us now to break down this case. Wendy, good morning.
Good morning, Raul.
Okay, give us the background on this, if you will.
Well, we've all known the conflict that has surrounded the types of workers that are employed allegedly by Uber and Lyft, and I'll call this lawsuit the survival of the side hustle. Because that has been the way many employees, as the court is alleging they are, have approached their jobs working for Uber and Lyft. In other words, it's not necessarily their full-time job, and they don't have the kinds of, at least so goes the argument, benefits that regular employees have. But now this lawsuit seeks to classify them as exactly that, because they basically say if you look like an employee, if you drive like an employee, if you are really compensated like an employee, you shouldn't be classified as an independent contractor. That's the conflict.
So the new lawsuit, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around all of this. Could there be a differentiating factor between people who really do this full time and the people who do it not necessarily full time, who just do it every once in a while when they want? Because the issue here is flexibility, from what I hear from drivers.
Well, that's the allure of working as an Uber or a Lyft driver. But according to the law, you have to meet certain requirements to be an employee or to be an independent contractor. And so they apply what they call the ABC test. They basically look at, how are you compensated? Do you have to follow your employer's rules? Who determines the conditions of employment? So on and so forth. And when they apply all these rules to Uber and Lyft drivers, the courts are basically saying, this is what the lower court held, you should be classified as employees, not as independent contractors. Now, that would be bad for the drivers, and it would probably drive them out of California quite literally, which was what we all heard was going to happen, which would be devastating to those of us who rely on Uber and Lyft to get around literally for a living. So a stay was granted by one of the higher courts, by the appellate court. But, this is an ongoing issue that we've been seeing with respect to Uber and Lyft since the law changed, trying to reclassify more of these gig economy type jobs as employees. Now, if they're employees, the employer has to give them a lot more benefits that they currently do, but they also lose a lot, like you mentioned, in terms of flexibility, for one.
Lyft and Uber, they didn't just sit back and take it. You mentioned this. We're going to leave California. We're just going to leave. And then that kind of said, whoa, 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 whoa. So what's the give and take going on here, really?
Well, that debate occurred in the court of public opinion.
But it worked.
Court of law, the judge, at least in the lower court, was unconvinced that those kinds of arguments would fly for Uber and Lyft, basically trying to say, no, they're actually independent contractors, even though they should look like employees. Let me tell you what, Raul, though, in November, this may become moot because there's another proposition on the ballot that, if adopted, would change the rules once again. And so everybody is just hoping, that this litigation maybe gets pushed back then, because we can't imagine getting back into a taxi cab and paying those rates. But in the meantime, in a court of law, it's just there's certain types of requirements you have to meet to actually be an independent contractor. If the employer, the supposed employer, has too much control, and I'm paraphrasing, over what you do, how you're paid, how you're compensated. When you get 5 stars, as we do with Uber, who sees that? Is that the driver, or is that actually the company, because they are exercising control over the future of the driver working there? So when I say the survival of the side hustle, it means exactly that. Especially in this economy, people really want to be able to keep their side jobs. And so everybody is having a very close eye on this litigation, because other companies like Grubhub and others that are the same kind of app-based service providers are going to be impacted as well.
I mean, this Prop 22, if you read through their webpage promoting them, a lot of the stuff makes sense. And then you go to the other side, a lot of the stuff there makes sense. These two companies have gotten so big that this is what happens when you get big as a company.
And we rely on them so much. And that's why we're talking about this. And that's why so many people are very concerned with the fate of this lawsuit, trying to figure out how can we keep these companies in business that we've learned to rely on, and that we are relying on even more in the pandemic. Not to mention the fact that those employees really need to keep those jobs, because many of them have lost what I'll call their main hustle, the
Yeah.
main source of income, and now they're relying on these side jobs.
I think you mentioned it by saying it's just going to be moot, but the fact that this lawsuit, and if the proposition passes, then the lawsuit goes away? Simple as
Well,
that?
if the proposition passes, it would change the landscape of the arguments and the analysis being made in the course of this lawsuit. And that's the kind of thing that really could change the whole landscape of whether or not this would still be a suit with merit. Now, you can imagine that if they were found to be employees, the employers would have to then be complying with things like minimum wage and rest breaks and insurance and coverage and all the kinds of things they don't have now. But on the other hand, they'd lose so many of the benefits that they get by being classified as independent contractors. So this is something that voters are thinking about both ways as they go into November, trying to figure out how they are going to vote on Prop 22.
We have a lot of homework in the next couple of months.
That's for
to
sure.
study for the
on
election.
a lot of fronts.
Oh boy, Wendy Patrick, thank you as always.
Thanks, Raul.